Okay, so next up, let's look at the end stage report itself. Now, before we start to look at the contents, let's just remind ourselves what the main purpose is. It's for the project board, in conjunction with the next stage plan, to make a decision on what to do next. For example, authorize the next stage plan along with the next stage tolerances, stop the project, close it prematurely, or change the project in some way, for example adjusting the project scope before continuing. Now, the end stage report itself gives a summary of the progress so far. It gives an overall picture of the total project, but basically it must contain sufficient information so that the project board has the evidence to make an informed choice on what to do next with the project. First of all, then, it contains a summary of the stage performance of the stage just completed by the project manager. Next, a review of the business case, giving again sufficient information to show that the business case remains viable. But if you remember, in any given stage, it may well be that some of the products have been handed over to the operational or business as usual part of the organisation. In other words, they're in operational use. In such case, the project manager would give a review of the benefits thus achieved so far. If that hasn't happened, then clearly this is not appropriate. If it has happened, any residual or remaining benefits expected. These remaining and residual benefits will consist of any that are still expected for the remaining stages or those expected after the project has completed. The expected net benefits, and by way of summarising the business case, any deviations that have been made. This part finishes by giving an aggregated summary, if you will, of the risks remaining. Then comes a review of the project objectives and the stage objectives. We'll do these both together. Review of project and stage performance, in other words, the review of the stage just finished, its performance, and the review of the total stages covered already during the project, and measuring these against the planned baseline time, cost, quality, scope, benefits, and risk targets. Again, do you remember these at the very beginning when we looked at the performance aspects of each project? It should include tolerances and how much each has been eaten into, if I can use that phrase. For example, if you had a cost tolerance of, say, plus £10,000, but you've eaten into that by £2,000, leaving £8,000 remaining, if you can see the point I'm making. And also, very importantly, how the project strategies. Now, do you remember in the PID we had the 4 strategy documents which were created? This is a review of how they are performing. To put another way, are they still appropriate? Are those strategies working? Indeed, do the strategies need to be modified in some way? For example, the amount of formality possibly in the communication management strategy. Is that still appropriate, and is it working? And of course the controls that are being applied, the project controls that were developed also and form part of the PID and are embedded in the project plan. Controls like the length of stages, the regularity of checkpoint reports, for example. Another aspect of controls that could be covered here is the amount of information and the amount of detail. Is it sufficient for the project to remain in control? Next, a review of the team performance, in particular recognition of good performance, but equally, I don't want to say poor performance, but it may well be that if some members of the team are struggling, then would training be appropriate? Indeed, was a training budget included within the project budget, or would training need to be provided elsewhere? It may well be that some of the team members need to be replaced, possibly with more experienced team members, for whatever reason. Next, issues and risks. This, of course, will talk about any current issues that have arisen during the stage, any current issues that have arisen during the stage yet are still being resolved, and risks that have either surfaced in the current stage and the responses are still being actioned, and the remaining risks which have yet to happen. Remember, one of the main purposes of the end stage report is to give the project board sufficient information to make a decision, and therefore the project board having this type of information at an end stage assessment will greatly assist them in doing just that. Now a review of the products, again from the current stage. Here's where the quality records are quite useful. The project manager will use these to list the quality activities that have been planned and also completed within the current stage. Those with approval records. It's quite possible you may have successfully completed 5 quality checks on 5 individual products, but only 4 have been approved for whatever reason. It may well be that those approvals will take some further time, but that it shouldn't stop us proceeding to the next stage. But at least again, that information is being presented here. We talked about issues and risks, any off specifications. You'll recall, of course, that any changes and off specifications is treated as a type of issue. Here, by means of a summary at the end of the stage, the off specifications will list any products that did not meet the quality criteria and confirming if any had been granted concessions by the project board. Phased handover, if any, in other words, if any of the products have been passed into operational life within this stage, and a summary of any follow-up action recommendations if applicable. When the closing a project process is used, then follow-on action recommendations will be generated, a report by the project manager to show any loose ends that still need to be resolved. If any products have been passed over to the operational area, then follow-on action recommendations should be prepared, but only if that's the case. In other words, if this was the end of a stage where no products had been completed or passed over, the only thing you'd expect to see in this section would be quality records, approval records, and off specifications and concessions. Lessons report, again, if appropriate, you'll remember that that is optional at the end of a stage. And the lessons report captures what went well during the stage, what didn't go so well, and any recommendations to be made for the next stage or for the remaining stages in the project or for future potential projects. Remember, at the end of the project, when the closing of project process is used, the lessons report will be passed on ultimately to be used by those responsible for embedding lessons within an organisation, often a project support office or a project office within an enterprise. And forecast. This is the project manager's forecast for both the next stage and for the project as a whole. And in here, the project manager will forecast against the baselines that were agreed and set up, plan targets such as time, cost, quality, scope, benefits and risk. And the forecast will include reference to any tolerances. For example, the project tolerances and how much has been used and how much is remaining. Now, just one final point, and that is that where the end stage report is being produced at the end of the initiation stage, that being usually a very much more informal and tending to be a shorter stage, because what you're doing there is to create the PID itself. There won't be any specialist products being created, so that not all of the above sections within an end stage report may be necessary.